Welcome to the Crafty Mini. This is episode 2 of the October Nightmare series, where we're going to be upcycling a Halloween prop decoration thing. So these skulls, you can get them pretty cheap. This was, for those in the UK, this was from Home Bargains, I think for £3. And we're going to just turn this into something gnarly. They're pretty good, they're good size, but you can do a lot more with them than just a big lump of plastic that's going to, again, end up on a landfill within a couple of months. So first thing I've done is broken off the jaw and re-glued it down just because I don't want it flapping about. I want this to be a static piece when it's finished. And we're going to paper mache it up, so tissue paper, and in that cup there I've got a mixture of Modge Podge and water. I'm using Modge Podge just because it's got a thicker bond than PVA, but you can use PVA, just put a bit more in than you normally would. The reason it's slightly blue is because there's a bit of paint in the bottom of the Modge Podge tub, because I've used it to hard coat other things in the past. Otherwise it would normally be clear or like a white in the actual tub itself. But just going to go all over the skull now with scrunched up tissue paper and cover this entire skull. It's going to have lumps and bumps and things on it, and we'll add some details on later on. Also, don't forget, at the end of the video there'll be some lore about the obsidian skull, as it's now called, and some cool backstory onto this weird artefact. And we'll be delving in deeper into the BPRD, which, not to spoil anything, but that'll be appearing more in the channel later on. So you can see we're going to be covering every part of the skull. I did blue tack around the teeth, thinking I didn't want to interfere with them, but there was no point really. If you just take your time, you can make sure that you don't cover any of the important details. But I'm just covering as much as I can. If it pulls and tears, that's absolutely fine, because we're going to go in later and rip some of the paper back off, so bits of bone are showing, because it just adds more depth to the piece and makes it look a bit more nasty. You can see it's all but covered now, just the last few bits. And then what we've started doing now is grabbing tissue paper, soaking it in the Modge Podge mix, and then rolling it up, and just to add a bit more sort of depth on the actual skull, because I want it to look more like skins back on it. So I go around like the rims of the teeth to make what would be like the muscles for the lips, around the nose hole itself, and then the eyes in particular. And with the eyes we can shape it a bit more to make it look, give it a bit more character, and give it almost try and give it an expression. And there you go, you can see here when it's shaped it just looks loads better. It's got a bit of a Red Skull Marvel vibe to it at the moment. But just going around and then again rolling up some of the tissue paper, putting it into the Modge Podge, and then just sticking that on in clumps as well. And just to make the effect that it's not just a flat skull, it's going to have these sort of lumps of skin and dried up desiccated flesh that are all over it. You want it to look a bit gnarly. It is Halloween, it's supposed to be scary and gruesome, so you know, let's make it that way. Right, now the fun part. So you can see I've already done a few here. But I'll do some more on the back. So while the tissue paper is still wet, I use the handle of a brush, and I just pull away some of the tissue paper and to leave so bits of the skull are actually showing back through. It's a really good effect, and it just, again, because the tissue paper will clump up around the edges. You can see there where I'm moving it now with the brush. It'll clump up around the edges, and it'll look like there's holes in the flesh when it's all dry. So just go around, add random holes. You can see here I'm just pushing with a bit of the Modge Podge, let it soaking just so it bonds to the skull, and just shape it up any way you want, and just leave these holes on areas like the jawbone right in the corner, the tops of the lips by the teeth. These are the areas that sort of get more wear and tear, and where the skin's going to stretch, so they'd be the ones that would tear quicker. And you're just going in and adding random holes all over the skull, and it's a really good effect that just makes it look a bit more 3D, because you're getting these ridges around the edges of where you're actually pulling and pushing the tissue paper, and because it's wet it's really easy to manoeuvre. And things like on the bottom jawline there, it keeps cracking away, so I've just left it bare. Once it's dry, which does take a while because it is Modge Podge and water, but once it's dry, first thing I do is give it a whole base coat in white. This is really cheap acrylic paint, it's a couple of quid for a big tub. Water it down slightly, you have to mix it really well because I think it uses a gel medium. So mix it really well and just slap this all over, and this is again just give it another coat, ties it all together, and it starts to look better. As soon as you get that first base coat with a lot of craft projects, models, kit bashes, things like that, they look really good once you've got that first base coat. So there he is, and then it's on to detail work now. Okay, so first thing I want to do is put a brown, so this is a mixture of brown, a little bit of green and some red. Thinned it down just with water, and these are again acrylic paints, and I'm just giving this a coat all over. I'm not too worried if I get on the bone bits, because at this point I was still deciding what colour should I do the bone, like an actual bone colour, and then I came up with an idea which we'll see later on in the video. But just put this all over the actual skull, because we want like a base tone which we're going to dry brush up and add details on later. Right, so once that's fully coated, now I'm going in with a bit of green which I've just put into the pot, and dabbing bits on, and then just wiping it off with a paper towel. And this is just going to add a bit more depth to the colour. It's adding layers, and it just makes it look really gnarly, because it shouldn't be perfect flesh. This is all dried and desiccated, and it's slowly reforming back. But just adding it on the sort of raised areas in random spots. And as you can see, I'm not being too careful with it. I'm just putting it on and then wiping it off, smudging it in. But it has a really cool effect. I mean, as it is now, you could leave it like that, to be honest. Maybe give it a dry brush, and that'd be a cool prop in itself. Right, so now on to the detail work. So on the exposed piece of the skull, I decided on this. I'm going to make an obsidian skull because I came up with a cool backstory for it, which you'll see at the end of the video. So any exposed pieces of skull now go in with, I think it's a dark sea grey by Vallejo. And then I'll just give this a quick black wash just to make the details pop before we go in and start adding the actual effects. And this is on every single piece of exposed skull. Really simple. Take your time going up to the lines. You don't want to spill over or anything like that. But it just makes it pop. And again, if you're doing more of a traditional skull, you've got the paper mache to this point. Just do these in a bone colour and wash them down. So like dark sand by Vallejo, and then a brown wash, and then just dry brush the dark sand back on after it's dry, and you get a really good bone effect. And because then with this actual toy as well, this decoration, it's actually got these ridges in, which is good, and you can use those to follow. But that's it after the black wash, and you can see it's a hell of a lot darker. So next thing is to get a contrast. I want to dry brush the skin area, so this is with light sand by Vallejo, just on my dry brush, and I'm just going around on the raised areas, picking out the skin, and you'll see bits of that brown and green still pop through, which is what I want. I want this to have as many layers as we can. And I'm just going around the whole thing now and just dry brushing him up. And you can see it's just catching the raised areas of the tissue paper where we've crumpled it before sticking it on, and it just makes everything pop and come to life a bit more. And again, you could just do this on the basic skull and not bother with the black bit and what we're going to be doing later, and it'd look good. It'd definitely be, upcycling it from a basic Halloween decoration anyway. Right, so on the actual skull details, there's like these little cracks between the different bones of the skull. So around the edges of where I've exposed it, I'm going to put this green paint on. And then in other areas, I'm actually going to paint in my own cracks and almost like a lightning sort of pattern. This is on every single area where the skull's showing. It looks a bit strange at the moment, but it does start to come together when we add the next layer. But taking our time, going around all the edges and just adding dark green paint. This is intermediate green. And same for when you get to the teeth, just paint them green, because the next step will make those pop. Because we're going to go over all the green again in a moment. Okay, and you can see here, so what I've actually done now is gone in with light green by Vallejo, and so what I've done is not going all the way up to the original green lines and just doing the centre part, so as if it's got like a glowing effect underneath the skull. That was the original idea. Now this does look a bit patchy when it goes on, but when it's finished, it all adds to the final effect. And again, you could do different colours with this, as long as you start, like for example blue, as long as you start with a dark blue and then do a light blue after that, and again don't go up to the lines, it adds this nice glowing effect. You could do reds in the same manner, oranges, yellows, whatever you wanted. And that's the finished piece there, and again at this step, you could leave it as is. Looks pretty good, especially in between the bits of the teeth and things like that. Looks really cool. Now what I've done here is, because I wanted like a deforming eye, so I've popped in just some glue from a hot glue gun into the left eye socket there as you look at it, and in the right eye socket I've put it in and swished it about as it was cooling, so it started to stick to the edges and added all these bits and lumps. And then I'm going to go in with the dark red now and base coat all the hot glue areas on this eye socket. And then on this eye I'm just going around the edge itself, and I'll add a few little veins and things and smudge it in, but nothing as deep as the other socket, because the idea was this is more of like an eye that has already formed, hasn't quite rotten, and it's starting to go milky and sort of cataracty, which you get that sort of effect from the glue gun itself. So I'll brush it on and then rub off with my finger and just smudge it through, whereas the other eye socket I want all the bits of sinew and things. Now some of where we've got the skull shown, where we've painted black and added this green effect, some of them are just framed with a bit of red, just very roughly go over, because all the tissue paper, it'll pick up all the texture and it'll just frame it a little bit more and make it pop, because red and green are nice opposites. And same around the nose and the edges of the lips. And the idea is that these are the extremities that the newer blood vessels are. Right, so now with a lighter red, this is Vermilion by Vallejo. You can see here that what I'm doing here is catching all the edges and the main highlights just to make it pop. And so you got a nice contrast between the reds. And everywhere we've done red, we'll do this and do a smaller part. The only extra bit is right in the middle of that eye socket there. I put a bit of the Vermilion in pure, and that's just to almost get the effect of where the optical nerve would be. And again, just going around all the edges, taking my time, drawing in some more veins if I need to, especially on this eye. And it just makes that other red, the initial red layer we've put down, pop. Right, so this is the wadding that I used for the troll fur. So I've got loads of this left. And again, this was from that, recycling this. It's from my neighbour's dog food box. So I'm just using some fabric glue, putting it onto patches of the skull, and then with the fur I'm just pulling out all the big lump bits, and then all the sinewy bits like this I'm just using now and just sticking it on, and this just looks like really cool rotting hair, which is the effect I want to go for. Again, when you're upcycling and you're trying to use it, just keep anything or anything that looks interesting like you might be able to use, keep it, because I guarantee you'll have some sort of project where you can use it. And this is pretty gruesome, and it just has a nice finish and it's all done, because it looks like it's still rotting and or in this case partially growing when you get to the backstory at the end. But again, just separating the threads, pulling them apart, so you don't want them in big thick clumps. You want it to look like it's quite sparingly. Put a little bit on where the fringe would be here, and then some on the back of the head, and that's him done. So I've put the hair not all over, but again just in patches, and just moving it around now, just making it look a bit more random and patchy. But that's it, good. And then so what we'll do now is all the black areas, the inside of the eye sockets, there you can see I've had a heavy gloss varnish just to make them shine and look a bit more slimy. And that's him done. That's the obsidian skull. Really like this one. Hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned now for the backstory, and we'll see you on the next October Nightmare. Thank you very much.
Case file number 21178B.
This obsidian skull was used by Aztec priests who followed in particular Huitzilopochtli, the solar and war deity of sacrifice. The skull has many magical properties, including healing and allowing the holder to predict cosmological events. While on its own is a fascinating artifact worthy of many museums and private collections, it has become part of BPRD inventory after it was donated.
Redacted.
It seems the skull had begun to drain the life force of
Redacted.
servants and houseworkers, and in a space of 6 months, began to regrow muscle and sinew.
Redacted.
Then began to sacrifice people in proximity of the skull, and more flesh, muscle and even hair has begun to regrow upon the obsidian skull. To date, 14 victims have befallen the obsidian skull, and thus has been moved to the high security wing of the BPRD for safety and further inspection. Our research and development team have thus far stopped the reanimation process and have begun a detailed reconstruction of the skull's face if it were fully restored. Attached is an image of this restoration using out facial software and pulling from DNA and molecular reworking techniques.
Warning.
In some rare cases, looking at the image has resulted in
Redacted.
and even death.